I heard that you had a big milestone with Cowork this week.
Yes. We wanted to kind of raise the floor in terms of the AI fluency of our company. So there's clearly people, even outside of engineering, who've really taken off with Claude Code. They've like terminal, they're like coding, they're like shipping a bunch of stuff. And a lot of people, even at the executive level, who understand how important AI is, their setups in terms of how they're using AI is still kind of in the very early stages. A lot of people still view AI as just a chat. I see a ton of people's eyes light up with like, wait, if I connect this to Gmail or I connect this to Google Calendar or I connect this to Slack, it just like makes me more efficient as a knowledge worker. And I think even just like raising the floor that much, I think was something that we were trying to do with this Cowork rollout. Now that we have a bunch of Claude adoption across the org at DoorDash, we're seeing massive increases in throughput.
I want to get into it a little bit, but before we do, I want to like step back a bit.
Sure.
How did you get into coding?
The first exposure I actually had to coding was when I was 9 years old. My mom was trying to get my brother to be occupied for the summer, and so she like sent him to this random coding camp, and then I had nothing to do, so she just like had me join this camp with him. It was intended for him, but I ended up being the one who picked it up. Rewinding back a bit in terms of the journey I went on with coding at DoorDash. So rewind back to 2013, I was, writing all the code directly myself in our dorm room at Stanford. And then after a while, like as the company was scaling, I kind of stopped coding. It wasn't until I was using Claude Code that I actually like was shipping production code in our code base again. So I like had a major comeback.
And then fast forward to today, tell me a little bit about your setup. Like how do you use Claude Code? Are you like in terminal or desktop, or are you on a laptop or on a screen?
For coding, I'll just use the terminal usually, or I'll experiment with using the desktop app. I set a goal for myself to like not write code manually. So I try to have the agent Claude Code basically write everything.
Do you have like one session at a time? Do you have like a bunch of sessions?
Oh, yeah. So I have multiple repositories set up, and then I will basically, if I have a repository that I want to have multiple sessions on, I'll use like a work tree to basically allow myself to code in the repo without conflicts, and then I try to have a couple sessions going at a time.
What was like that first experience using Claude Code in this way? Do you remember?
I distinctly remember like, okay, I'm gonna try to like code actual features in production. And I made it a goal for myself to not ask anyone for help and see how far I went. Unfortunately, at that point, I did not make it to shipping the code in production without help because I wasn't able to get the agent to understand how to configure my local environment correctly. Then fast forward to like, I think it was probably the beginning of this year, 2026. I did the same thing and it just worked. And I think, you've definitely seen this. I've heard you talk about this where like, there's really been an inflection point with the latest models of being able to just figure things out. Yeah, and I've gotten to a point where like I was shipping in 5 different languages to production. And I think it's just super powerful. And I think it's very hard to believe it until you actually force yourself to play with it.
It's funny, there's this like thing that happens where you try something and you use an old model and the product doesn't really work or the DevX doesn't work. And then you just like try it again in a couple months and it might just work.
Yes.
And this used to be like the worst idea before LLMs because it's sort of like dysfunctional to take the same idea and then just like try it over and over again because like you should be learning. But actually now trying just that same exact idea with a newer model, sometimes it just works.
Something that we've tried to get the teams to unlearn at DoorDash is like, it's okay to throw away your idea. Like, because I think sometimes with engineers, you have a real strong affinity to something you've built that works. But I think as the models change and the capabilities change, it's like, hey, look, like whether it's your setup or like maybe an agent that you're building, it's like, you got to reimagine how you're building this stuff with how the capabilities are changing so fast. And so I think it's as a leader, if you can really lean in and play with this stuff yourself, like, hey, every engineering manager, you should try to set a goal to ship production code. Not like a prototype, because like you can ship a prototype on your local setup pretty easily, but like try to go through all the hoops at DoorDash to get something merged in production. and do it yourself. It'll open your eyes both in terms of the capabilities of the models, but also like, hey, for the engineers on the team, what's blocking them or what's causing them to not move as fast as they ideally could.
What have you learned with this? Like, is it working well? Is every manager like, heck yeah, let's go? Like,
I think what's really landed with people at DoorDash is we're here to invest in you all, to give you all the token budgets and the tools for you to play around, explore these coding agents and get them to work well for you. And I think that message is really stuck. And I think for managers in particularly, as they've kind of played around with it, they start to understand it too. And so I think, I wouldn't say like we're perfect by any means, but I think we're definitely getting people to go along the curve.
This is just the most fun I've ever had coding.
Yeah.
And just building in general. It's like the part that I enjoyed the act of writing code, but also the thing that I always cared about the most is the result. And now I can just like prototype really fast and build really fast. And it's so much fun. But then it has this other side of like, you just have all these agents running and you're constantly context switching.
Absolutely.
And it's hard. It's a different way of working.
Yeah, and I think like it's very mentally taxing at times. And then there's also things new problems that come up, which I'm sure you guys are dealing with as well. Is like if there's all this code that's being shipped, now people start complaining about, oh my gosh, how long it takes for the code to get merged. And like there's so many processes on CI/CD that we need to reimagine or overhaul as well. And we've invested in like AI code review agents to make it easier for people to review the code. For example, with security-related issues, a lot more security-related issues are cropping up, not just at DoorDash, industry-wide. Now we need to figure out how to get AI to also help catch these security issues before we ship it to production as well. So it's like kind of like a cat and mouse game in a little bit. As the capabilities are increasing, as the throughput's increasing, making sure that people are catching up and we're using AI to help streamline the automation.
When did you first introduce Claude Code to DoorDash? And how did you think about it?
So I was like, sometime in 2025, we introduced Claude Code, and then people started using it. We worked pretty closely with our IT security teams to make sure that like, hey, we're going to have a special like procurement and review process for these AI tools because the industry and the landscape's moving so fast. We want to make sure people get access to the stuff pretty much right away. I would say the true inflection point, I would say, is probably at the beginning of this year or late last year. And since then, our coding throughput we've seen a correlation with the adoption of Claude Code and basically like throughput from the teams. But I would say it all kind of stemmed back to both executive leadership support, but also like partnership with IT, security, and engineering to just make sure that like, hey, with the tools that are available, like try to get people access to it as quickly as possible and not be so stringent on budgets to start with and just like optimize for letting people explore with the landscape.
Yeah. So it's like give people like the ability to explore, but then also like set the right guardrails.
Yes.
Like security is like not negotiable.
Exactly. Security was very much in the loop. And I think our security team has done a phenomenal job of kind of moving quickly with the industry while like partnering closely with us to make sure that they have their eyes on the types of tools that we're getting access to.
So with all these different tools, with this totally new way of working, how do you like make people feel safe experimenting with it?
Early on, our mindset was like, give the tools to the people and see who the early adopters are and just see what they feel like is working. What we've done since then is try to pluck examples of success cases, whether it's particular projects or people who have done a good job, and get them to be the advocates within their team. And I think one thing we've tried to emphasize is try to, as much as possible, get people to produce written artifacts, because that's stuff I can share with the entire company. And so we've seen some success there, but with an organization of our size, it's kind of hard to like uniformly enforce that. But that's generally the mindset I've tried to encourage across the organization is like each team needs to have their own channels and forums for people to feel comfortable sharing both the wins and the shortcomings, to be honest. It's like it's just as important to showcase, hey, here's something I did that was cool, versus is also important to show, hey, here's this workflow that I tried that didn't work, or here's this MCP integration that I did that like wasted a bunch of tokens. I think we want people to feel comfortable sharing that type of stuff as well.
So you started, using Claude Code, and people started advocating for these tools, and then fast forward to today, how does DoorDash use Claude Code?
It's pretty much widespread across the org in terms of people either using Claude Code or using Claude models within like other harnesses. We're investing a lot more in automation and basically able to tap into the increased throughput, how do you make sure that's as frictionless as possible? So investments into CI/CD, using Claude to build AI code review agents for us. We actually have built an internal platform that we call Flux. It's an infrastructure investment where we have VMs that are in the DoorDash cloud, where you can like spin up Claude sessions that are blessed by security to have access to the right type of tools. And that way you can actually fire off Claude sessions in the cloud. And that's actually how our AI code review agent is powered as well, as on top of that platform.
Super cool. That's like Agent SDK?
Yeah, using Agent SDK and the Claude models.
Oh, cool.
And so that's been super helpful for us to use those frameworks to basically build that.
Yeah, like the thing that you were saying before about how you kind of, you start with a coding and then you kind of go like a bottleneck at a time and just kind of like break down the next wall like over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
That's just like so similar to what we've been going through too.
We set some goals for designers to actually start shipping code to production. It didn't go 100% smoothly, but I think directionally it was very good because it really forced designers to think about how to get directly embedded into the software development process. So I think that's been really cool to see. And I think we've gone to a point now where I would say a lot of our best teams have designers and product managers embedded directly in the software development cycle. And they're all using Claude to basically empower themselves. Challenge I've posed to the entire team is like try to get projects done in 3 to 5x less time using AI to do so. And I think when you set those kind of constraints, it's pretty eye-opening in terms of the types of challenges people run into. And so a lot of it is around how they use coding agents and how people use like standardized skills so that people can all get the learnings of the most prolific people. Like there's an engineer who did a massive like code migration that would have historically taken like 4 engineers over a quarter to do. One person did it in 3 weeks. And I think there's other products where we shaved the timelines by more than half of these massive products that we're trying to launch. And we pulled the launch timelines in significantly. And so I think it's like finding pockets where we're seeing those and figuring out, okay, what did you do that was so successful? Getting them to publish written artifacts, as I mentioned earlier, so that people can like see what's going on. Right now, what we're doing is we're like handpicking a couple of teams to really dive deep and give this kind of charter to, and just see what they come up with.
What are some of the learnings from that? From, like experimenting and figuring out what are the pockets of adoption, what works to accelerate development, what doesn't work? Like what's like one surprising thing that works and one thing that doesn't?
One thing for sure is smaller teams is a great accelerant. Each person can kind of own a thing or a couple different domains, and you don't have to like coordinate as much with each other. Another good learning was actually like, it actually pays off to do some upfront investment to setting up your code base to be agent friendly. So in one of our successful examples, the tech lead, he jotted down, like a couple dozen, maybe 50 plus, like principles of like architectural principles that he cared about for a particular code base. And he jotted it down in these markdown files within the GitHub repository so that when the agent was coding, that it could reference these architectural principles, and it actually was super helpful. Another thing that was really helpful was standardizing skills across the team. So for example, for mobile development, the team put together skills around basically making it really easy to spin up the simulator and test particular workflows. Things that would be super manual and annoying for an engineer to instrument themselves is now just like a skill that you can call and kind of run in the background. So I would say those are some like positive use cases that we saw in terms of AI adoption. Challenge that we ran into was, particularly for like more user-facing features where, you're not just like coding a platform change or a code migration. It requires cross-functional buy-in. You need the designs to be aligned. You need to make sure that from a product perspective, you're solving the right problems. And we have a lot of these processes that we've put in place for good reason, like around product review or ship review or design review, things that historically were very important for us to get alignment with each other. But now it's a huge friction point. And so we've had to really build alignment with cross-functional leaders to make sure that if we want to really take advantage of AI velocity, it's not just an engineering problem. it's a whole company problem. Like cross-functional leaders need to be bought in to change the way they work in order to unlock this type of velocity. Like we need to be okay with not necessarily having product review work in the same way, or do we even need to have product review? Historically, an engineer would have to spend a lot of time getting design to be pixel perfect. But if the engineers can get it in a workable state and then we can pass it off to the designer who can get to pixel perfect self-sufficiently, that's really powerful. I think something that we've generally found to be true is the more self-sufficient a team is or an individual is, the faster they can move. And so that's kind of a philosophy that we're trying to really push when we are encouraging people to be more AI forward.
So like less process, less design docs, less reviews.
Yeah, and just like working directly in prototypes if you're a designer, working directly in the code, basically streamlining a lot of the process or reimagining it maybe. Because like some of this process is there for important reasons. Maybe there's compliance related things that need to go on. But then it's just asking the team like, hey, if we want to shrink the timeline by 3x, like what's a way we can leverage agents to automate a lot of it or make it faster? And I think the mindset in terms of like how teams should change is like, hey, you don't necessarily need everybody to be a domain expert. In fact, you should encourage people to be as fluid across the code base as possible. Like, a lot of our mobile engineers, we actually encourage them now to try to be more full stack, which is a lot more accessible now than it was even a year ago. We still need domain experts in like, for example, iOS to make sure that, there's particular parts of the architecture or kind of how we managing memory or latency and performance, but you don't need your whole team to be iOS experts. You can have much fewer of them be gatekeepers and figure out how to build agents to basically check for the things or write in MD files their architectural principles or things they care about. And you have a lot more people who can be generalists and moving across fluidly across the code base. And I think that's like a mindset change also that we need to get people more comfortable with.
Yeah.
As well.
So when you have one of these small teams working on something, but you want to give them the space to experiment and to kind of figure out the process. So how do you think about staffing this team? Like what's like the ideal kind of profile for it?
We try to make sure that for these teams that we're giving these remits to, we want to make sure that they feel safe in experimenting and pushing here. So I will actually directly lean in, or I'll ask our like executives from like the engineering or various adjacent functions to actually lean in with these teams and basically have like executive VP level sponsorship on that particular work stream to figure out, hey, whatever you need to do to get unblocked, like you have the sponsorship from high up leadership to do so. Because one thing that I've seen not necessarily work as well in the beginning is if you ask people to do this, but they're working within the same confines of kind of their normal job, then they're going to give up pretty quickly. Unless you empower them to be like, hey, you actually, not only are you going to get token budget to kind of reimagine things with AI, but I want you to raise to us, your cross-functional leadership team, what is hindering you outside of just generating code. And so I think that's worked really well to make people feel safer. We're still trying to figure out how to scale that, but ideally what would happen is as we see these success examples crop up, we share those written artifacts with various leaders so that people can kind of organically try to adopt these practices.
It's like the limiting factor used to be the speed of coding, and that limited kind of the speed of delivery. That dictated the team setup. That dictated having to have process and these org reviews and kind of like the cadence of exec check-ins and all this stuff.
Absolutely.
And now because engineering is so fast, it kind of forces you to rethink all this stuff.
And there's actually so much more that like a team of 3 to 5 can do. It's like almost like you kind of want to like invest in making that unit move as fast as possible because like if you can get that unit to work 3 to 5 times faster, then like that's totally game changing for the org.
Okay, I wanted to touch on maybe a few final things. So, how are you thinking about ROI? So
Sure.
you talked a little bit before about first when you're kind of early in the journey, you just want to give people as many tokens as possible, let them experiment. Now you're thinking a little bit more about ROI. How do you think about it?
I think for engineering, that's a little bit more straightforward because you can actually, I know like code throughput's not a perfect metric and it's a game mobile metric, but it's directionally kind of correct in a lot of ways. And also the fact that like you can get the same project done faster with fewer people means that the people you have today you want them using it as much as possible. I think in knowledge work, I think we're so early. And I think to a point you made, I think there's a lot of things outside of just like the triage my email type use cases that I think are really powerful with Cowork that we're just scratching the surface on. Like I think for sales teams, having to do QBRs with like tens of thousands of merchants, right? Like that's a lot of manual work. And if we can really streamline that and make it more accurate and vetted like with consistency via AI, that's super powerful. There's two ways that we are thinking about it right now. One is just in terms of like raising the baseline, like how much time are we saving the average person in terms of tasks that everybody needs to do. And then there's what I think might end up being more impactful is on a per department or domain basis, can we identify particular workflows to automate that would make it significantly more efficient to run that department? So that's kind of how we're thinking about it right now. But in the knowledge workspace, to be honest, we're so early that I think we're kind of in the exploration phase there right now.
Yeah. Okay. So for coding, it's about like the volume of code increases. So like the code throughput you can measure, and then the speed of delivery you can measure pretty easily, and just like freed up people to do stuff.
Yeah, and I think ultimately for engineering, well, it's not just engineering because it involves like design, it involves cross-functional support. But at the end of the day, like we want customer value to be delivered faster. And so if we can actually prove that out, not just in terms of code getting merged, but also like customers seeing the product live faster, I think for us, that's like the ultimate success metric.
Yeah, yeah. And like for knowledge work, we're still figuring it out. It's still domain dependent.
I think there is a lot of value to be had if we can get everybody to be like even 10% more productive with this stuff. That's huge. Like at a company of our scale, and so I do think there is value in terms of raising the floor. But I do think with knowledge work, there's still a lot of explorations to be had around domain-specific workflows.
And I guess it's just back to the way that innovation actually happens. Like if you're like top down, like, hey, go automate this workflow, you might actually just pick the wrong workflow or the wrong person to automate it.
Totally.
But if you give everyone the freedom to experiment, you're going to be surprised by, some person over here automates this thing, some person over here automates this thing. And you might not even have known it's a bottleneck.
Totally. And that's why we call them AI champions internally right now. It's like we're trying to identify champions within each domain, like sales or marketing or operations or support. And so we're trying to identify who organically is cropping up, who's doing this in their spare time or just naturally gravitating and being prolific with these tools to really help figure out, okay, like what are the big pain points within your domain? Because I don't know. And then can you figure out a way to either make that workflow a lot more streamlined using agents, or can you figure out a way to make it much easier for your coworkers to be streamlined using a shared set of skills?
So like famously, you started using AI in coding interviews pretty early. I think before even we did. And I think we still don't. How do you think about it? Like how do you find these people that succeed in this kind of environment, that are happy, experimenting and that enjoy this kind of work?
I think our mindset is give people the tools and just see who ends up naturally picking it up. You will naturally find out about those people, whether it's through Slack channels or
they're going to tell you.
They're going to tell you, yeah, because they're having so much fun and enthusiasm around that they can't help but share that enthusiasm with their peers. So I think it hasn't been that hard for us to find a champion, especially on the non-technical side. And then on the technical side, I think we've just found people who've naturally become power users and taking off with it.
Okay, I want to close with one last question.
Sure.
What is your advice for engineering leaders, so like other CTOs and leaders at other companies? And then on the flip side, what's your advice for new grads? Like
Sure.
You're in college right now, you're graduating. What would you tell each?
Man, so I would say for the engineering leaders, make sure you use the AI so that like you can encourage your teams to use AI. But also, I think it also gives you a sense of empathy in terms of the types of anxiety or stress that engineers might go through to like change how they work. And it's like kind of a identity crisis in some ways for engineers. A lot of people are tied to like the craft of like the code that they're writing, but you kind of got to let go of that a little bit. And I think as a leader, I think you really need to understand that. And the best way to understand that is to play around with it yourself and understand how powerful these tools are, but also how drastically your workflow needs to change. And then also encouraging people to share written artifacts. I'll say that again. It's like that's, in my opinion, the most scalable way to distribute learnings at scale. It's also a byproduct of it is you actually end up having artifacts that agents can read. So that's what I would say to engineering leaders. New grads are picking this up so quickly in a lot of ways. My encouragement is stay curious, play around with the tools. I think a lot of companies like DoorDash, what we are really excited about with the new grad talent is people who've grown up with this paradigm of working, who can surprise us in terms of ways that we can leverage this technology that we didn't think was previously possible.
Andy, thank you so much.
Yeah, Boris, it's a pleasure to be on here. Thanks for having me.